I went in thinking I was going to be a lifer. While I was in, I had a relationship that went south, and I allowed that to affect me at work. And then work started to go south. So then I allowed that to affect me at home. And it was just a tornado because I couldn't escape the work at home and I couldn't escape home at work because it was just a disaster. But that's on me, right? I didn't like handle things properly.
Welcome to Your Story Doesn't End Here, the mental health podcast of military and veterans who refuse to be silenced. I'm your host, Rachel, and my mission with this podcast is to be a voice for those who don't have a voice, bring awareness to mental health issues, provide value and solutions, and to change the culture when it comes to mental health within the DoD organizations. Hey everyone, thank you so much for coming back for another episode of Your Story Doesn't End Here. Today's guest is Joshua. He is a USMC vet. He served from 2013 to 2017, and these days is the host of the MBGA podcast. Joshua, I'm so excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here as well.
Yeah, so first, tell us a little bit about you and your story and your background. It's obviously been a couple of years since you left the service and you're doing your own thing now, but I'd love to just get into some stories of your time served. What made you decide to join the military, specifically the Marine Corps? And any highlights or any even disparities? Just tell us all the stories about your time in and what you're up to since you've been out.
Hello, my name is Joshua Ryan Mach. I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran, as you said. But I grew up in like small town USA in Illinois, about 45 minutes south of Chicago. But whatever you picture Chicago, throw that out your mind because it was cornfields and tractor traffic jams. My dad was always very supportive of the military and loved like the Wild West shows and military shows. And I always wanted to join the military. I was also a little bit overweight. And by a little bit, I mean a lot. And I never joined. Graduated high school and I didn't join. I was in community college, and I am not a fan of college, not a fan of school. It's just not for me. I don't have that drive to like learn something I'm not interested in. And so I finally joined the Marine Corps. The reason I joined the Marine Corps is because I do have a pretty big ego. Jokingly or not, it's there. So I had to be the best of the best, right? I have to wear the sexiest uniforms, all that fun stuff. I joined the Marine Corps. I didn't go on any combat deployments or anything like that. I call it a vacation. I went to Oman for a month, maybe. The first week of being there, I spent it in like the nicest hotel I've ever been in. So I didn't really do much on the combat side of the military. But then when I got out, I planned on becoming a cop and a police officer. I separated my shoulder, had surgery, didn't recover properly due to my fault, right? Like I didn't go to physical therapy like I should have. I've just been struggling for years. Like I never figured out why, right? Like I would blame it on other things. And then it came down to like, I don't have that sense of pride or belonging anymore. And I was in and out of therapy. I went through several therapists before I finally found like one that actually worked for me. And that is how the podcast came to, because I had the idea of doing it. And I told my therapist, and she's like, "Hey, do you have your phone on you?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's in my pocket." She's like, "Pull it out, go on Facebook and start live." And I was like, "Get the fuck out of here." Sorry. I was like, "Get out of here. I am not about to go live and tell people I'm going to do this when I don't even know what I'm talking about yet. But I was like, "I promise you I'll go home and I'll record a video." And so that's how I started on Veterans Day 2 years ago. My podcast, MVGA, which stands for Make Veterans Great Again, where I reach out to fellow brothers and sisters in arms, conquer our mental health together. Just remind everybody that they're not alone. We all have our struggles. But the best part about the podcast is it's amazing helping other people, right? But how much it actually helps me, and hearing other stories inspires me to open up different chapters or different memories that I may have blocked out or blacked out for like coping mechanisms. And it's helping me grow as an individual as well. So that's I'm sure I've missed a lot of things. So feel
It's
free.
okay. It's okay. And you can curse, by the way. I didn't tell
All
you
right.
that a little bit before we started, but there's so much community that we get when we're serving in the military, and we don't even realize. Like, I couldn't stand a lot of the people that I served with. Like, I had some great friends. I had some people that I was like, "Get me out of here. I don't want to see you ever again."
Yeah.
And I really fixated a lot on that when I was in. I think in the Marine Corps, and Amy, you could speak to this more than I can because you're in the Marine Corps. I get the sense that the Marine Corps is a little different because there's so much of that brotherhood, sisterhood, like family mentality. Like the Marines that I served alongside when I was in my A school, like they took care of each other. It didn't matter if like so and so fucked up, was out way too late, was running around drunk, naked somewhere. I mean, they took care of each other. And I always had that respect for Marines because like it doesn't matter what it is. We don't throw each other under the bus because we are like a brotherhood or a sisterhood. But it's crazy how much that affects us when we get out. Like I didn't even think of it when I was in like going from being around this group of people, not just from a 9 to 5, but you literally like work with these people, you eat, you sleep. These some of these people know like your deepest, darkest secrets or like what's happening in your life. Like it's like a dysfunctional family. And so, I want to talk about when you got out, you said you struggled a lot. And I want to talk about how the military prepares people for that transition because in
They
my
don't.
opinion, they don't. Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
And what talk us through a little bit of your process. We're working backwards here a little bit because I have a few things I want to chat about, being in, but while it's on my mind, just talking about what you did. What was that process like for you once you got out? Was it like right away you figured out like, oh my gosh, I don't have my community anymore? Right away, boom, like depression or whatever hits. Or was it like a gradual process where you really had to like find yourself and figure out what was going on over a course of years?
It was definitely a gradual process, and it was a process that I wasn't even aware of that was happening, right? Like I said, I have this ego. So when I got out, I was like, I'll wing this. Didn't have a full plan, had a barely like a guideline plan, right? And then I got crashed on a dirt bike, separated my shoulder, had to have surgery. So that threw my plan right out the window. And then like it just took years of like I mean, I knew I was depressed and sad, but I didn't know why. I didn't want to connect it with being separated out of the Marine Corps because I didn't feel like that's what it was. But you mentioned a great point that like it's like a brotherhood and a sisterhood, like a fucked up version of it, right? Like you have people that you don't like, that's in the Marine Corps as well. But at the end of the day, like when it comes time to it, we got to protect each other no matter what. Right. And I was working like dead end job after dead end job. And like I thought it was the job. I just wasn't happy at my job. I wasn't happy here. I wasn't happy with this, but it was genuinely because I lost that sense of pride and that sense of belonging. And like you were talking about that family, I have an idea or a theory that like while we're active duty, we have group therapy daily, whether we realize it or not, because that person to the left and right of you, like, yeah, they know when you shit, shower, and sleep, but they also can joke with you the same way. You can talk to them in a different way. Like you can, I just got off the phone call with a gentleman that has his own podcast, right? And he gave me this analogy that like we learned how to play rugby, right? Say we came from a world of soccer, but we learned how to play rugby. But rugby's violent and aggressive and you tackle and all that. But in soccer, you can't do all that. So like we're trying to play soccer, but as a rugby player, and we have to adapt back into the soccer community, if that makes sense, because I just spark notes what he said and it made way more sense when he said it. But that's like a great analogy because we're trained to be so aggressive and high strung, and our testosterone is just through the roof. And like, what do we do for fun when we're bored? We'll fight each other, right? Like, who?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, and like at the end of the day, like you go back to your rooms, hug it out, drink, do whatever, and do it all over again the next day. But that was just part of being in the community. And then you come out into the civilian world and you have to be a little bit more careful, a little less aggressive. But it's so hard because it's been instilled in you for 4+ years. Like that's all you know. And you feel like this is how you need to be. But that is no longer how you will succeed in the civilian world if you're still trying to succeed in the using your military mindset.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong, that mindset does transfer over to the civilian world and it will help you out and help you be successful, but you have to learn how to adapt
Right.
and like change certain things.
Yeah. I mean, one thing that I wish the military would do more is prepare people for the transition a little better out of the military. But B, I wish they would really focus on skills, like teaching people that what you learn in the military, it's not just specific to the military. You are learning skills that you can translate to any job and make you valuable in any job. But I think it's so easy to put like what we do in the military into a box. Like I was a aviation electronics technician, and if I was to say fill out a resume for the civilian world, a lot of that resume might look like just what I did as an aviation electronics technician. But oh my gosh, the skills that we learn in the military, leadership skills, how to work as a group, how to adapt and overcome in situations.
Yeah, I get what you mean 100%. And I guess it's kind of like the purpose. We need to know or understand the purpose of why we do certain things, because that's when it translates to the civilian world, right? Like why we're police calling, walking around looking for trash. There's a much deeper meaning doing that opposed to just like cleaning up the area you're in, right? Like it's attention to detail. It's looking for things out of place. There's just so much more into the little things that we do that we don't even realize it. Like this is so annoying. Why do we got to do this
Yeah.
stuff every day? But it's the discipline that is what's going to translate into the civilian sector. I think we need to start teaching mental health within the military, whether that's straight from boot camp or basic, wherever you go to, or like throughout, like the death by PowerPoint, like
Yeah.
throw in some sort of mental health in there.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of people in the military do learn very hands-on because it is a very hands-on type career. And somehow figuring out ways to teach people these skills throughout what they're doing to take care of their mental health, I think would be great. But I want to take it back a little bit to the time that you served in the military, because I think it's important to address that not every single military member, not every Marine, not every sailor, every soldier is going to go through combat and what might be considered by civilians like a typical military experience. I also didn't do anything combat related. I went to Bahrain 2 times. And I remember the first time that I went to Bahrain, there was some friend or, friend of a family member that was like super, super worried because they're like, she's going to the Middle East. Oh my gosh, are you terrified? And I'm like, it's Bahrain. Like, chill out. Yes, there's always a risk. There's a risk in Japan though, like there's a
Right.
risk in the US. Like I was in the military. There's a risk no matter where I go in the world, right? There's always going
Right.
to be an enemy, quote unquote, somewhere. But I want to talk about what you did in your time served. And if you could just kind of give us a brief overview of that, because I want people to understand that every job looks a little different. And it doesn't matter what we do, we still get affected when we get out of the service in our own ways, right?
Right. And I want to touch on like that's a struggle too that I didn't see combat, but I'll get there. So but I was a combat engineer and I was on the division side. So I played with explosives and I trained to deploy and go into combat and search for IEDs or how to blow things up and yada yada yada. Yeah. While in training or like in the field or whatever, like there's a mentality or whatever that you ain't shit until you have your combat action ribbon, and like you train to deploy and to see combat and to do this and that. And then like I'm a 3 ribbon sergeant, right? Like that's kind of embarrassing for me personally, but like that's just my personal take on it that I'm working on. Like I'm realizing that my calling wasn't to go see combat and to fight the war overseas, right? I'm realizing my calling is to fight the war once we're back at home, and the war on our mental health. So like I'm using what I'm doing now in my podcast as my new calling to make me feel more okay and approve of myself in a sense of fighting. But yeah, all your seniors, they just talk to us like, yeah, this is how you're supposed to train. Like they treat you like you're going to war, and like you don't get that respect until you've earned it, right? So like when you get out and you haven't earned it, you're like, well, I'm a failure. Like I'm proud as fuck to be a Marine, right? Like it took a lot for me to join. I lost 70 pounds in 6 months just to enlist, and then another like 20 pounds in boot camp. I still only made weight once in the entire Marine Corps. I had to tape the rest of the time, but and that was in boot camp, so of course. But yeah, so the mindset while you're in is like you need to be a hard charger. You have to be savage. You have to be ready at any time, and you have to stay in shape.
Yeah, I want to talk about this a little more and deep dive a little more into it about the things that we have as expectations when we serve that really, really weigh on us mentally. Because I mean, I know that like there were certain things that just kind of seemed like the norm that everyone got, i.e., like getting a NAM, right? Like everyone got a NAM when they left their command, and I never received a NAM the entire time I was in. They're little things that don't seem like a big thing, But that's some shit that like affected me. Like I thought about it a lot when I was in, like, am I not good enough? What am I doing wrong? Like constantly having this battle in my head of like, oh, maybe I should just go with what everyone else is saying to do instead of standing up for the people around me that I need to stand up for. Maybe then I would get more rewards. And so I want to talk a little bit more about this subject of like how we place ourselves to the standard in the military of feeling like we need a certain amount of ribbons or a certain amount of awards or achievements or whatever it is, it's going to look a little different for everyone, and how that affects us.
I think while you're still in the military, that mindset is good. It like keeps the military being the military, right? I don't get me wrong, there's bad apples and there's people that take that above and beyond that will fuck you over just to get a ribbon or to look like they're doing the right thing, right? But I feel like that's what the military needs to be able to function at such a high level. They need the cocky, they need the assholes, they need the arrogant people, they need people willing to do shit and just be hard chargers, right? I don't feel like that transitions well once you get out, right? Because like you can go see somebody and you're like, damn, you had like 12 ribbons and I only had 3, but what are you doing now? You're like, I hate saying this, but the military is like a narcissist, right? They know how to treat you to get exactly what they want out of you. And if you don't, tough shit, then you're out. You don't mean shit to them. As shitty as that may sound, but I want to support that because that's exactly what the military needs, right? Like I do believe that the general population does not need to know 90% of the shit that happens within the military, right? Because then it causes so many problems. And there's people telling us how to act while in the military that never even been in a day in their life. And they're like, oh, this is going to make it better for them. But yeah, they're
The
not putting us at
Facebook
more risk.
warriors.
Yeah, like the
Yeah.
keyboard warriors and all that, like everybody, but it goes all the way up to the politicians, right? Like, yeah, a lot of them are there to help us out and like they may mean well, but at the end of the day, it puts us at danger sometimes.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it's interesting because I remember when I got out of the military, and one of the first things that I thought was like, man, none of these awards, none of these papers, some of them matter. Like, some of the certifications that I got, I'll still use those till this day when I talk about what I did, like my Lean Six Sigma that translates to the civilian world. But a lot of that shit, it does not matter. Like it's literally just again like pulling the skills that I learned in 6.5 years and then translating those to the civilian world and whatever I'm doing now. And I'm similar to you. One of my passions is just making mental health better for military, for civilians, and whatever have you. And so talking about the time that you got out of the military and you're starting to realize that, hey, I know I'm dealing with depression. I just had this injury and I'm just kind of in this weird place. Like, talk us through that part of your story. And at what point did you decide to start seeing a therapist? Because I think, especially with you being a man, this is an important thing to talk about because men's mental health is not talked about enough.
So honestly, I went to therapy while I was in the military, but it didn't, I don't want to say it was a waste of time because it helped me in that moment, but it didn't help me progress through life. And I'm going to take part of the blame. Well, I'm going to take a lot of the blame because one, I was going for a therapist that was like my grandma, somebody that just made me feel comfortable and I could like talk to them about without feeling that judge. Like I didn't want to see a male therapist because in my mind, I'm judging myself through his eyes. Like this guy's a little bitch, yada yada yada, right? But but I kept going to therapists like that once I was out as well. And they just wasn't working for me. And I realized that I actually stopped going to therapy. Like I was like, this isn't working for me. I'm just done. I don't care. My wife's like, can you come to a therapy session with me with my therapist as like a couples therapy? And I was like, yeah, of course. So we went and then she's like, do you like her? Do you want her to be your therapist? She's willing to be both our therapist and our group therapist. And I was like, okay, I'll give her a chance. And I do feel comfortable talking to her, but she does, as soon as I hit that wall, she pushes me. She like makes me go through it or talk about things. Whereas the past therapist, once I hit that wall, they'd be like, oh, it's okay, go at your own pace. And then I would just manipulate the situation around that wall. And I wouldn't address what's truly bothering me. I wouldn't be able to unlock the next chapter or level of trauma, pain, whatever I was going through because I was just so busy like feeling comfort, right? And then I also wasn't doing my homework from therapy, right? Because you think that 1 hour session or whatever it is, however many times you go a month or week or whatever, that's going to be enough. And it's really not. Like they're leading you to the water, and it's up to you if you want to drink it. And honestly, I've been out since 2017. And within this past year, I'll say, is when I started to realize, like, oh, it is my lost sense of pride and my lost of like belonging. So like I didn't realize from that when I got hurt, or when I got out, got hurt, and then till now, I didn't realize that whole time that like a lot of the sadness and depression was coming from like not being in the community anymore. And it's taken me, was that like 4 years now to figure it out and do better. And it's a slow progress, and it's a daily thing. To be honest with you, New Year's Eve, I went out and then I ended up going out drinking afterwards. And I didn't intend to drink. And then I drank, and drinking negatively affects my mental health beyond belief. I mean, I was able to control myself, and I only drank beer, didn't have shots, and yada yada yada. But I drank enough that it affected me too bad. And these past like 3 4 days, I've been in a huge like depressed stump, and I'm just sad, and I can't figure it out. And I'm trying so hard to pulling it out. Like, but now when I catch myself saying something sad, I'll in my mind, I'm saying it right, like subconsciously. I'll verbally say the opposite out loud. Like, I am strong. I am powerful. I do deserve to be here. I am making a difference. Like my I am statements, which is also amazing. Ironically, part of my homework, right, from therapy is to do the I am statements and look at yourself in the mirror and say them. But I do still, even though I'm pro mental health and pro therapy and all that, I still feel the stigma around certain things that were like, oh, it's okay for you to do it 100%. But like me, this person, especially that I'm trying to put myself into this like spotlight, I'm like, I can't be that person. I can't do those things. Like, that's silly to me, right? But the more I'm learning to put all those negative thoughts and self-doubt aside and actually doing the work, like I'm seeing the progress, I'm seeing the growth, and how helpful those little tools are that therapy gives you.
You made so many good points there. I'm like jotting down notes in my brain while you're talking. First of all, I want to talk about the part where you said your therapist you were comfortable with, because I think a lot of people don't like to embrace discomfort,
Right.
and there's no growth in the comfort zone. I mean, we hear this over and over and over and over, but man, when we're in a state where we're already uncomfortable because we're already going through it with mental health, depression, anxiety, whatever, and then knowing on top of that, oh, I need a therapist who's going to push me. It's like for me, I know in the back of my head that I need a therapist that's going to push me. I haven't found one yet, but there's so many different types of therapy out there that it's like sometimes it is just that trial and error of figuring out what works for you, or maybe asking the therapist or asking people who have seen the therapist. I mean, it sounds like your wife had a pretty good idea of like, hey, let's try this out together, see if this works. And that's phenomenal. But I think people understanding that there's like somatic therapy, there's, the immersion therapy, there's NLP. I mean, there's so many different types that we have to find what works for us. But also knowing that if you're going to a therapist where it's just like they're just agreeing with everything you're saying, it can be great from a like venting standpoint, but that's not what's going to help you change and grow and move beyond what it is that's, it's affecting you mentally. And so I love that you brought that point up. But another point that you brought up that I really, really resonated with is those of us that are working in the mental health space. Like, it's so hard to take our own advice, right? Like, I could give people advice all day long and look at that same exact advice and not apply it in my own life. And it's hard because it's like this mental battle where it's like, okay, well, I am the face of, my brand, which is military mental health, and to not take my own advice, or sometimes to feel like it's not okay to go through depression or to go through anxiety because I feel like I have to be the one that has to be okay. And so I'm so, so glad that you brought this up because I relate so much. I mean, winter season is tough for me. Seasonal depression hits me very hard every single year. And every year it's like trying to figure out new ways to really pull myself out of that and feeling like I need to be a certain type of person. But I'm slowly learning to like work around it and, you know, take care of myself when I need to take care of myself, rest when I need to, but then figuring out that fine line of okay, like what's rest and what's too much rest, right? Like
Right.
it's tough.
It is, because then you battle yourself. Like, am I doing enough? Am I not doing enough? Like, okay, I give myself credit because I did X, Y, and Z today. So now I'm going to take a break. And then tomorrow you're like, I shouldn't have taken that break. I should have just pushed through it. I should have did this. I should. But as my therapist is telling me, when you say I should, you're judging and you're not supposed to judge.
Yeah.
So I am trying to counter that by saying, like, look, this is, for example, I'm not a reader, but I am trying to start reading because I know how beneficial it is. And I'm trying to become more articulate. And I know reading helps with that. So I set a bare minimum standard of reading 1 page a day. And like sometimes I'm like, I don't even want to read that 1 page a day, but I force myself to because that's keeping my word to myself, which is in return building my self confidence. But I feel you on that. Like, it's so hard. It's like a fine line, like
Yeah.
too much, too little, not enough.
Yeah. So we're bouncing around quite a bit in your story, but I'm just kind of going with the flow like I normally
Sorry.
do on my interviews. And no, it's not even your fault. It's me because
Okay.
my brain's all over the place, but it's okay. Because
Makes two of us.
yeah, I know, right? So earlier you said that when you got out, your plan was to be a police officer.
Correct.
Why did you choose to be a police officer?
Oh, my dad was a cop my whole life. He retired while I was on my second year, I want to say, in the military. And it was just something I always wanted to do. I have pictures of me at like 7 years old in my dad's uniform, and it's just like all baggy and hanging off me. And it's always something I wanted to do. And obviously, I didn't join the military till I was already 21. So I could have become a cop, right? But my fear was that if my dad, I just assumed that my dad was going to help me get a job, or if I got a job in a police department, it was through my dad. I had the fear of like, if I messed up, I don't want that to come back on my father. And then the second one where my ego steps in is like, I have to do one step above my dad, but like to make him proud, not to shame him or anything like that. Like, to make my father proud, I wanted to be above him. And I knew he always wanted to join the military. And I always loved the military and everything I saw like on TV and everything. But I was just too out of shape to do it until I finally just put my mind to it.
So when you weren't able to follow through fully with becoming a police officer because of your physical injury, how did that affect you mentally?
At first, it didn't. Like, I was just okay with it. I was like, whatever, let's just continue winging life. And then I got into a job that I was there for like 3 or 4 years. That was pretty much a dead end job, and it just didn't work out for me. And it's still something, I don't want to say I'm pushing it to the curb, right, or to the back burner, but it's something I'm working through where, like, if I allow myself to think about it, then yeah, I'll start like feeling bummed about it. Or like if I watch the show The Rookie, I don't know if you've heard of it or seen it, but it's like a 30-year-old like rookie police officer, and that I was like, that could be me. Like, I'm giving myself till the end of this year to get into shape and join the police academy or like join the police force, and I just haven't. And now I'm literally just focusing mainly on this podcast, and I want to grow this into the career, because the more people I can help, the more people I can save, right? And then the more I can help, the more I'm helping myself.
Yeah, I love it. You know, what's interesting, I hear so many patterns from people that I talk to that have separated from the military. One of the patterns from people that, well, Marines specifically, that didn't do combat, I hear a lot of, you know, shame and regret experienced at some point. That's a pattern. Another pattern that I hear is a lot of veterans, regardless of what branch, that get out and they kind of experience something similar when it comes to the workforce. Like either they have a plan and the plan falls through, or you know, they're just not figuring out what quite works for them. And so one of the things that I've been trying to figure out lately, and maybe you can provide some insight onto this from your own perspective, but trying to figure out what makes some veterans more, and I don't want to use this word, but I'm going to, more successful than others. Because we see some vets that get out and either their plan falls through or they just straight up like go homeless right away. But then we see some people that get out and they're thriving, right? Like they're doing what they love, they're working a job that they love. And I don't know what that disconnect is. I don't know if it's like a preparedness thing while they were in versus getting out. I don't know if it's just pursuing passions versus trying to fit in a place where maybe we weren't quite meant to be, but we tried to force it. I mean, what do you think? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot of variables that go into this question, but the main one I want to say is being prepared. So I was prepared to get out, but I had senioritis. I dropped back and I was just done, ready to be done. There's a program called Skill Bridge. Don't know if you've heard about it.
Yep.
I didn't I had a buddy that went through it, but by the time he went through it, I was already past, like I was getting out before him, so I couldn't join it. But like I feel like if you plan and you know what's coming next, opposed to me, I just tried to wing it. I need routine and structure or it's chaos in my brain. And like if one thing throws me off my routine, it's kind of hard to like keep that chaos to a minimum and like to adapt, because like I like things to go in order, because I like to know what's happening next and how it's going to work. But a main thing is like preparation for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you were getting out, at what point did you decide like, hey, I'm getting out. This is going to be my next step. And I'm going to quote unquote start preparing for this. Was it a year, 2 years, right in the beginning?
I went in thinking I was going to be a lifer. While I was in, I had a relationship that went south, and I allowed that to affect me at work. And then work started to go south. So then I allowed that to affect me at home. And it was just a tornado, because I couldn't escape the work at home and I couldn't escape home at work, because it was just a disaster. But that's on me, right? I didn't like handle things properly. And I guess some of the leadership wasn't the greatest either, but I don't want to go into that. That's me. A little over 6 months, I finally decided to like just fully get out. Like right when you were supposed to start doing your reenlistment packet, I was like, fuck no. I went out and I just could not wait till my freedoms. It was like I made it, but like what did I make it? I made it back to the civilian world, and now what?
Yeah.
And I just didn't prepare properly for it. I mean, I started to take tests for the police academy in Newport, but I didn't make it past the interview section, which is on my fault because I was too buddy instead of just like by the books. They asked me questions and I said how I answered it how I would want somebody to do it if it was me. But I had to remember that I was actually going to become a new officer, and if I was ready to blur the legal lines, like one question was like, if you met a couple that was celebrating their 60th anniversary drinking wine on the beach, but alcohol's illegal, like what are you going to do? I was like, I'll just pour it out and like keep the community police relationship growing, right? But wrong answer. I'm a new cop. Like I have to ticket. I'm sorry. Like happy 60th anniversary, but here's your ticket.
That's interesting. I think there's so many people in the military that get told, like, and I don't know if this was your experience, but there's so many people that get told, like, oh, you should just stay in if you're unsure, or, oh, just re-enlist and, figure it out when you have more time. And, I think that, this goes back to the preparing service members for transition, because at some point, whether it's 4 years, 10 years, 20 years, at some point, transition's going to happen. So at some point, people need to at least know the options for them. So Skill Bridge, you mentioned that's a great one. I knew about Skill Bridge. The only reason I didn't take advantage of Skill Bridge was because my plan was to go to school, which a lot of people do. That's also a great option for a lot of people. It can be really, really shitty when it's like everything feels rushed, and 6 months is a long time, but it's not. I mean, 6 months to figure out like the next step of your life, like that's a very, very short period of time when you're trying to juggle work and all the checkout bullshit and, the next step of your life. And I mean, it can be very overwhelming in the mind. And so, yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack when it comes to figuring out like what is the best process. I think it varies a little for everyone. Some people come in and they're like, oh, 4 years from now, I'm going to school, I'm out. They know their plan. Some people have a plan and it changes. I mean, other than like saying to prepare for that person that's really unsure, kind of like you were, what do you think would have been helpful for you? I mean, do you think that knowing earlier on, I mean, I guess you can't even really say that, right? Because like you were that guy that was like, 6 months out. So for someone that was like you, if you could go back and give yourself advice at that time, what would you have told yourself?
Start a year within getting out to like planning what's next, and like because that gives you times to change your idea, and that gives you times to like concrete it, like reinforce it, So that way you don't just get out and start winging it. Like, yeah, you want to go to school, but make sure you know what your degree, what you want to do, like everything. Preparation for sure.
Do you believe in having a plan B on top of a plan A?
I don't like to prepare for plan B because I want plan A to succeed, right? So that may be another part of my problem is I'm so focused on one thing, I'm putting all my eggs in one basket, which is actually what I did, to be honest, because I was I was like, oh, it'll be so easy to become a cop. I'm a Marine, like I'm just gonna transition and it's gonna go well, and then bam, crashed the dirt bike the first day I rode it. So, uh, yeah, just you definitely need a plan B just in case.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I've told my story several times on here, so the audience should know. But I mean, I had a plan to go to nursing school, and that went out the window too for me. And I very much felt stuck for a while because I mean, I was pregnant, so that threw a separate dynamic into it. But it's hard. It's hard to feel like you failed if plan A doesn't work. And I know that wasn't like your experience. For me, it was to a point, but also not. So I mean, it's a weird thing that's so hard to like describe. But let's talk a little bit about your podcast
Okay.
because we haven't gotten into that too much yet. So you started your podcast to really give back and serve the community. What's your vision with your podcast other than, growing it and yeah, what are you trying to do?
Well, ultimately, I think right now I'm gonna start a foundation. We're just gonna call it MVGA Foundation for right now, and I want to become this generation's version of the VFW because the VFW does great things, right? And no disrespect to them, but that's no longer what our generation needs. And if you, most people I've talked to, most veterans I've talked to, that mention that they've gone to a VFW, that they're very turned off and like don't want to go back, or they don't even want to step foot in a VFW because they only imagine it as like Vietnam era veterans smoking, drinking, and just talking bullshit, right? Which is good, but that's not who we are anymore, or that's not where our minds are at, right? Like, especially Vietnam era veterans. I don't, me personally, those are some tough motherfuckers, right? Because I know we've gotten soft since then. And like, I don't mean that as like an insult. I honestly feel like we keep getting softer each generation because our parents keep providing us with nicer and better things and things that they never had, therefore, unfortunately, making us soft, right?
Yeah.
But so yeah, I want to bring that community back, like the VFW has tried to do, but I want to make it bigger. I want to be all over the country, all over the states. Like each state has its own MVGA foundation area, whatever it ends up being called. I have a plan for it, just haven't put it in motion.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I mean, I just think it's unrelatable when you get two different generations together. I love talking to some Vietnam era vets because they have some stories. But at the end of the day, like we just can't relate to each other on the same military playing field. Like it's just a different military now than it was back then. So I get it.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be a military playing field. Just like our personalities don't always match up properly, right? Like we
Right.
can get along with each other because we are veterans and we respect each other for that aspect, right? But we all talk differently, act differently. Like they're watching black and white TV and now everything's in color, you know? So like it's just small things like that too that add up to it.
Right, right, exactly. So tell us, Josh, where can we find you? Your podcast? Do you have social media website? Where can we find you if we want to support?
I'm most active on Instagram, and that's make veterans great again, but underscores. So it's like make underscore veterans underscore great underscore again. I have a website that's coming out and it's going to be makeveteransgreatagain.org, all spelt out. I can be found on like Spotify, Apple, Google, all your streaming sources by searching MVGA or MVGA podcast.
Awesome. And I'm going to be on his podcast too. So make sure you look out for
Absolutely.
that episode. And I will make sure I post all those in the links below for anyone that was maybe confused when you're spelling it out. Go make sure you follow his podcast, support the cause, and keep up with what he's doing. I'm really excited to see what happens on your side of things for mental health with the veteran community. And I'm so, so grateful that you came on the show today, Josh. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your vision of the future and what you're going to be doing to really impact the community. Last thing I'm going to ask you is any last words that you want to leave the audience with?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you to you as well for having me on here. And I appreciate coming on here. And I look forward to talking to you on my podcast so I can ask the questions and listen to you talk this time. I should have had something prepared because the last thing I asked for is any saved rounds. So, like, if I've missed anything or anything you want to say, but no, just like preparation, and don't be afraid to go to therapy. But I like to tell everyone, don't be shocked when the first 2 to 3 therapists don't match or don't fit you. Like, it's a trial and error type thing. And yes, it is brutal having to tell your stories and traumas over and over again. But eventually you're going to find the right therapist that clicks, and it's going to be so worth it. You're going to feel the bricks coming off your chest. You're going to feel relieved, and like, you're actually going to start the growth that you've been trying for. But you also have to put in that work at home. You have to do the homework that you're sent home with, and just continue to grow.
Thank you for taking the time to listen in today. With your support, we are able to increase awareness of the mental health issues affecting service members and veterans today, with the goal of creating positive change. If you got value from this episode, please take 30 seconds to subscribe and share this episode within your own network. Until next time, remember, your story matters, your mental health matters, and your story doesn't end here.